Imagine standing on the banks of the Nile River thousands of years ago, the air thick with the scent of lotus flowers and the distant roar of a crocodile breaking the silence. You're in ancient Egypt, where one of the most feared creatures of the river wasn't just a predator, it was a god. Welcome to the wild, awe-inspiring world of the crocodile cult of Sobek, where the ancient Egyptians turned a terrifying beast into a divine symbol of power, fertility, and protection. On this episode of Ancient Odyssey, we're diving deep into a story that's as fascinating as it is bizarre. A tale of sacred crocodiles draped in gold, pampered like royalty, and mummified with the same reverence as pharaohs. So grab a seat, maybe not too close to the water, and let's unravel the mystery of Sobek, the crocodile-headed god who ruled the Nile and the hearts of an entire civilization. To understand the crocodile cult, we need to start with Sobek himself, a deity who was as complex as the river he called home. Picture this, a towering figure with the body of a man but the head of a crocodile, his sharp teeth glinting under the Egyptian sun. To the ancient Egyptians, Sobek was the embodiment of the Nile's dual nature, life-giving and deadly. The Nile was their lifeline, flooding the fields to grow crops that fed millions, but it was also home to crocodiles that could snatch a person in seconds. Sobek represented that balance, creation and chaos, fertility and ferocity. He wasn't just a god of the river, he was tied to military might and even the pharaoh's own strength. Think of him as the ancient Egyptian version of a superhero, but with a serious bite. Now let's set the scene in ancient Egypt, around 3,000 years ago. The Nile is bustling, boats glide across its surface, fishermen cast nets, and farmers tend to lush fields fed by the river's annual floods. But along the banks, in places like Crocodilopolis in the Faiyum region and Kom Ombo further south, something extraordinary is happening. Temples dedicated to Sobek are thriving, and they're not just filled with statues or priests chanting prayers. Inside these sacred spaces, actual crocodiles, living, breathing, and toothy crocodiles, are being treated like divine celebrities. These weren't your average reptiles. They were believed to be avatars of Sobek himself, chosen to carry his divine essence. Imagine walking into a temple and seeing a massive crocodile lounging in a stone-lined pond, its scales shimmering in the torchlight, while priests offer it food fit for a king. It's the kind of thing that would make your jaw drop, right? Crocodilopolis, known to the Egyptians as Shedet, was the heart of the Sobek cult. The Faiyum region was a fertile oasis, a perfect spot for farming, thanks to the Nile's flooding, and Sobek was seen as the guardian of this abundance. The star of the show here was a crocodile named Petsuchos, which translates to he who belongs to Suchos, another name for Sobek. Petsuchos wasn't just any crocodile. He was the celebrity of reptiles, living a life of luxury that would make modern influencers jealous. Priests hand-fed him the best cuts of meat, sometimes even mixed with honey cakes and wine. They adorned him with gold earrings, bracelets, and necklaces, turning this scaly creature into a walking, or rather swimming, jewel. If you were an ancient Egyptian visiting the temple, you would see this massive beast being pampered like royalty, and you would know you were in the presence of something divine. But why crocodiles? To us, they might seem like unlikely candidates for worship. If you've ever watched a nature documentary, you know these creatures are apex predators, capable of taking down anything that gets too close. In ancient Egypt, that raw power was exactly the point. Crocodiles were the Nile's ultimate survivors, commanding respect and fear. By worshipping Sobek through these creatures, the Egyptians were tapping into that strength, hoping to harness it for their own protection and prosperity. It's like how we might admire a sports hero for their strength and skill. Except instead of a quarterback, ancient Egyptians were cheering for a 15-foot-long reptile with a lethal smile. The rituals surrounding these sacred crocodiles were something else. Let's paint a picture. You're standing in the temple courtyard at Crocodilopolis, the sun beating down, the air buzzing with anticipation. Priests in white linen robes move carefully around the sacred pond, chanting hymns to Sobek. They carry trays of roasted meats, bread, and even flowers to offer the crocodile god. The crowd watches in awe as Petsuchos glides through the water, his eyes like polished stones above the surface. If he accepts the offerings, it's a good sign. Sobek is pleased, and the Nile will continue to bless the land. If he ignores them, well, that might mean trouble, and the priests would scramble to make things right. It's not hard to imagine the mix of fear and reverence in the air, like being at a rock concert where the star could devour you. These crocodiles weren't just temple pets. They were part of a bigger spiritual system. The Egyptians believed that by honoring Sobek's avatars, they were ensuring the fertility of their fields and the safety of their communities. Sobek was also linked to the pharaoh's power, so a strong, healthy sacred crocodile was a symbol of a strong, healthy ruler. In a way, these reptiles were like living barometers of the kingdom's well-being. If you've ever followed a sports team and felt like their wins or losses reflected your own mood, you can relate to how the Egyptians saw their sacred crocodiles as a direct line to the divine. Of course, keeping a massive predator as a temple mascot wasn't without its challenges. Crocodiles aren't exactly cuddly, and even the priests had to be careful. Historical records, like those from the Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt around 450 BCE, describe how the crocodiles at Crocodilopolis were tame enough to be handled, but still dangerous. Herodotus wrote that the priests could approach Petsuchos without fear, but you can bet they stayed on their toes. Imagine being a priest tasked with putting a gold bracelet on a crocodile's leg. Talk about a high-stakes job. Yet, the Egyptians pulled it off, creating a system where these animals were both worshipped and managed with incredible skill. When a sacred crocodile died, the party didn't stop. It got even more elaborate. The Egyptians didn't just toss their divine reptiles into the river. They gave them funerals fit for royalty. The crocodile's body was carefully mummified, a process as detailed as the one used for humans. Priests would clean the body, remove the organs, and stuff it with natron, a natural salt, to dry it out. Then, they'd wrap it in layers of linen, sometimes adding amulets or prayers for the crocodile's journey to the afterlife. These mummified crocodiles were buried in special necropolises, like the one at Tebtunis in the Faiyum, where archaeologists have found thousands of crocodile mummies, some still gleaming with traces of gold. It's a bit like imagining a pet cemetery where every grave is a work of art, dedicated to a creature believed to carry the spirit of a god. These burials weren't just for show, they reflected a deep belief in the afterlife. The Egyptians thought Sobek's crocodiles carried his essence, so sending them off properly ensured the god's favor in the next world. If you've ever gone all out for a loved one's funeral, you can understand the care they took. Some necropolises even had tiny crocodile mummies, babies or eggs, buried alongside the adults, suggesting the Egyptians wanted to honor Sobek's fertility in every form. It's a touching detail, showing how the cult celebrated life, even in death. The cult of Sobek wasn't just a quirky sideshow in ancient Egypt. It was a big deal, woven into the fabric of a civilization that thrived on the Nile's rhythms. While Crocodilopolis in the Faiyum was the cult's superstar hub, Sobek's worship stretched far beyond, especially to places like Kom Ombo, a stunning temple complex perched above the Nile. Kom Ombo was unique because it was a double temple, split between Sobek and Horus, the falcon-headed god of the sky. Imagine a place where two divine heavyweights shared the spotlight, like a high-stakes sports event where crocodiles and falcons were the mascots. The temple's carvings, still visible today, show Sobek with his crocodile head, standing tall beside pharaohs and other gods, a reminder of his importance. For the Egyptians, visiting Kom Ombo was like going to a sacred theme park, where you could feel the power of the Nile and the heavens in one place. But Sobek's cult wasn't just for priests and pharaohs, it touched everyday people too. Farmers in the Faiyum, who depended on the Nile's floods to grow their crops, saw Sobek as their protector. If you've ever lived in a place where the weather can make or break your year, like tornado season in the Midwest, you can relate to how those farmers felt. The Nile's floods were unpredictable, sometimes too much, sometimes too little, and Sobek was the entity you prayed to for balance. Ordinary Egyptians would bring small offerings to his temples, like pottery or food, hoping for a good harvest or safety from the river's dangers. It's not hard to imagine a farmer, after a long day in the fields, kneeling by a shrine to Sobek, whispering a prayer to keep those crocodiles at bay while the crops grew tall. The cult's influence went beyond religion. It was a social and economic powerhouse. Temples like Crocodilopolis were like small cities, employing priests, artisans, and laborers who kept the place running. Think of it like a major community center, where people came not just to worship but to trade, socialize, and even settle disputes. The sacred crocodiles, like Petsuchos, were the main attraction, drawing pilgrims from across Egypt. These visitors brought goods, offerings, and stories, turning Sobek's temples into hubs of culture and commerce. If you've ever been to a big festival, like Mardi Gras or a state fair, you can picture the energy, crowds, music, food, and a shared sense of something bigger. That was Crocodilopolis on a festival day, with a crocodile as the guest of honor. Now, let's talk about the nitty-gritty of keeping these divine reptiles. Caring for a sacred crocodile wasn't like feeding a goldfish. These were massive, unpredictable animals, sometimes growing up to 20 feet long, with jaws that could crush bone. The priests had to be part zookeeper, part spiritual guide, and part daredevil. They'd build special ponds within the temple, designed to keep the crocodiles comfortable but contained. These weren't just holes in the ground. They were lined with stone, filled with clean water, and surrounded by offerings. The priests would watch for signs that a crocodile was worthy of being Sobek's avatar, like unusual markings or behavior. It's a bit like picking a star athlete for a team, except the tryouts involved sharp teeth and a bad attitude. Of course, things didn't always go smoothly. Crocodiles, even sacred ones, could be moody. Historical accounts, like those from the Roman writer Pliny the Elder, hint at moments when the sacred crocodiles weren't exactly cooperative. Imagine a priest trying to coax Petsuchos into accepting an offering, only for the crocodile to snap or swim away. It must have been like dealing with a grumpy rock star who refuses to perform. In rare cases, crocodiles might have injured or even killed their handlers, though the Egyptians were skilled at managing them. They'd use food and rituals to keep the beasts calm, but you can bet there were some tense moments. It's a reminder that even in a world of divine worship, nature had a way of keeping everyone humble. The cult of Sobek also left its mark on Egyptian art and culture. Temples were covered in carvings of crocodiles, Sobek, and scenes of pharaohs offering gifts to the god. These images weren't just decoration. They were like billboards proclaiming Sobek's power. Jewelry shaped like crocodiles, amulets, and even pottery with crocodile motifs popped up across Egypt, especially in the Faiyum. It's a bit like how we wear team logos or carry symbols of what matters to us. Sobek was a brand, and his followers wore it proudly. As centuries passed, the cult of Sobek evolved. By the time the Greeks and Romans arrived in Egypt, around 300 BCE and later, the crocodile cult was still going strong, but it started to change. The Greeks, who called Crocodilopolis Crocodilopolis, were fascinated but sometimes skeptical, writing about the cult with a mix of awe and amusement. The Romans, too, kept the temples running, but as Egypt became more connected to the wider world, Sobek's worship began to fade. By the time Christianity spread through Egypt in the early centuries CE, the crocodile cult was mostly a memory, its temples abandoned, its sacred ponds empty. Yet the legacy of Sobek lives on. Archaeologists are still digging up crocodile mummies, temple ruins, and artifacts that tell this incredible story. If you've ever visited a museum and marveled at an ancient Egyptian statue, you've likely seen Sobek's fierce crocodile face staring back. His cult reminds us how the Egyptians turned fear into reverence, chaos into order, and a river predator into a symbol of life. It's a story that resonates today, when we still grapple with nature's power and beauty, from tornadoes to hurricanes. So next time you see a crocodile, hopefully on TV, think of Sobek, the god who swam through the Nile and into the heart of a civilization. Well, that's a wrap on our deep dive into the crocodile cult of Sobek, a story that takes us from the shimmering banks of the Nile to the heart of ancient Egyptian spirituality. We've seen how a fearsome creature became a divine superstar, draped in gold and honored in death, reflecting a culture that found balance in the wild unpredictability of nature. It's the kind of tale that makes you look at the world a little differently, isn't it? Thanks for exploring the ancient world with us on Ancient Odyssey. If this journey into Sobek's realm fascinated you, make sure to smash that subscribe button, drop a like, and leave a comment. Let us know what you thought about those crocodile priests or what ancient mystery you want us to uncover next. Stay curious, and we'll catch you in the next episode.